For today's technical demonstration, I'm going to be providing a complete overview of VMware Carbon Black Cloud. Now, Carbon Black Cloud empowers services that protect multiple different environments such as endpoints, workloads, containers, virtualized or physical as well here. When we deliver features and functionalities on this platform, we do deliver it in terms of modules, and all of those modules align to key areas like identifying risk, preventing adversarial threats, or detecting and responding to those threats. All through one unified cloud platform and single agent as well here. If you are a customer or you are a prospect and you're interested in looking at this functionality, what you would be logging into here is our cloud-based portal. Upon initial entry, you will be exposed to our dashboard view. Now, this dashboard view provides a complete overview of your assets and what type of activity we are identifying on those assets. All of these reports and modules here can export via CSV or be downloaded in a PDF report for C-level executive reporting here. Now, I want to talk about the product in terms of layers. Typically, when I think about layers, the first thing that we want to talk about is how can we identify risk? What can we do to help you up front to start mitigating and closing gaps at the onset? And typically this conversation is centering around vulnerability assessment. What kind of vulnerabilities do we have on our endpoints, our workloads, our containers here? And what can we do to communicate this so we can start mitigating said risk? By clicking in on any of the dashboard modules, you will be drilling into a page that provides more information on those particular, in this case, vulnerabilities. Now, the benefit to Carbon Black and being able to provide vulnerability assessment across virtual machines, endpoints, and containers is that this is not something that is signature focused. Many traditional endpoint assessment or vulnerability assessment tools, what they will do is they will go in when a vulnerability is identified, they will need an engineer to create a signature. Then they will push that signature out to the customer environments, and then it is up to you, the customer, to actually schedule that scan. Carbon Black does it differently. What we have is access to information like the applications that are installed, what versions are installed, as well as your operating system and those versions, so that when a vulnerability is identified, we correlate across that data set so that we can instantly identify what vulnerabilities exist in your environment, and we want to take it one step further than that. We don't want you to have thousands and thousands of critical vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Rather, what we need to do is assess what the importance is here. So criticality is actually prioritized by, yes, criticality, but it's also prioritized by exploitability. So if something has a high exploitation factor, if it's easy for an adversary to actually compromise your system through this vulnerability, we escalate that priority, making sure that you only have 17 critical vulnerabilities across your 7 assets, as opposed to all 6,000 vulnerabilities that we're identifying here. Or, I'm sorry, all 21,000 vulnerabilities that we're able to identify. If we know anything about vulnerabilities, is that it is typically 1 in 10 different vulnerabilities actually get patched. So let's make sure you're prioritizing your efforts and focusing in on the ones that will drive the largest impact here. Now, the reason that we can do this in a scanless manner is because this is powered through Live Query. Now, Live Query is our way of being able to assess overall risk. We can start to do more with this as well. But this is something that actually creates a virtualized database of your operating system so that rather than us dictating what data you need access to, you can specify a particular question and get an answer back from your system. So if, for example, we wanted to look back at the very popular WannaCry ransomware that leveraged SMBv1, yes, we know this is relatively old to talk about, but it's still relevant. Because what's interesting about something like SMBv1 is that this vulnerability, based on the vulnerability assessment, would be categorized as critical or high here. But what we want to be able to do is start saying, okay, in these situations, we can't always patch something like SMBv1. So the security team needs to be able to have insight into where that risk may still exist so we can start to elevate our overall permissions or policy level on those assets. So by running this particular query, you can also schedule it daily, weekly, or monthly at specified times. But by running this query, what the security team will now get insight into is what assets are exposed to SMBv1 or eternal blue hardening here. Now these results will start to populate back very quickly, right? We just scheduled that query. You saw this flash here where all of a sudden more responses came back. This is because of our heartbeat. We are able to look at that database of information and answer that question back within our heartbeat time frame, which is in a 3 to 5 minute window, but you actually saw this come back in less than a minute here. That's because the assets are going to be checking into our back end at a staggered variance or a staggered cadence here, so that we'll start to continue to get these results back and we can continue to see these climb. We can export these results, or we can start to filter these results to see where these have matched within our environment to understand where this is enabled or disabled and what type of remediation actions we would then need to take. So that's just a quick overview of some of the identify risk capabilities that we do provide. What we then want to talk about is prevention. In the case of SMBv1, if we are identifying where that vulnerability couldn't have been patched, security has insight into those assets, what we probably now want to do is elevate the protection level on those assets that are exposed to this vulnerability. Now, when we start to talk about prevention is delivered in multiple different layers for our customers. I like to think of them in different segments here. First, we want to look at cloud reputation. If you are a customer and you are leveraging Carbon Black Cloud, what first and foremost we must be able to do is identify something as simple as node malware existing in your environment. Now, I bring this up not because it was revolutionary, rather because we do this differently than most other NGAV vendors. A lot of people in the NGAV space put the risk on the customer by waiting for malware to execute to then scan and classify and block that within your environment. What we don't want to do is put that risk on the customer. What happens if the cloud reputation services is unavailable, or the device goes offline and the cache is not up to date to recognize that as truly malicious? So what we do is we proactively go in and scan and assess your environment so that even if there is no run symbol here, so it hasn't run within my organization, I can scan and classify that file, ensuring that this can be automatically removed by Carbon Black or manually removed based on your preference through the console here. But we want to shift as far left, identify malware so that you don't have to run the risk of malware running within your environment due to miscategorization. The second thing that falls into cloud reputation is machine learning components. If we know anything about the industry, is that it is very simplistic to change a hash value. So what we need to do, what all vendors need to do, is leverage machine learning components to increase your efficacy. So if something is unknown or unrecognized to VirusTotal, yet contains malicious payload and content, we can still scan and classify that as a virus and treat it as a virus. But if we know machine learning, I always equate this back to our email or our spam filter. It is by no means foolproof. Spear phishing campaigns are one of the number one initial access techniques that adversaries use to get access to your environment. Spam filters should start to remove some of those. It does increase the efficacy, but it is not foolproof. So what we need to do is look to more advanced behavioral prevention and more advanced scripting prevention technology to start moving you forward in terms of your efficacy and your security posture. So this brings me to the next layer, which is scripting prevention in terms of zero-touch prevention that we deliver for our customers. This is key in the era of the remote workforce. Whether your users are on network or off network, what happens with our advanced scripting prevention is that if something like SolarWinds occurs, we are able to leverage that zero-touch prevention to deploy high-confidence, high-fidelity blocking campaigns or blocking activity so that we can stop things like scripts from executing across your organization based on the behaviors that it would exhibit. So this actually hooks in from an AMSI standpoint so that even though this does not have a run symbol associated with it, I'm able to take Ryuk.ps1, a trusted application, and associate it with ransomware behavior because we can see that data destruction was associated with it. There was impact also tagged here, but this is something that is deployed with no interaction from our end users so that we can continue to evolve based on the threat landscape and the threat research and make sure that we are shifting as far left and blocking this before it executes, not just based on behavioral indicators. Again, this is no interaction from you to be able to benefit from this functionality. But if we know anything about adversaries, is that they're increasingly intelligent. We need to be able to assess and analyze things like behaviors as well. So this brings us into our behavioral analytics component. Now, opening this up, what we will be able to see is a complete visual depiction of this particular attack instance. What I think is very convenient and beneficial for our users is that we attempt to correlate this based on a time frame so that you're not analyzing each individual IOC. Rather, you're looking at the impact holistically and starting to assess what that would impact based on your posture. So here we can see that there are actually two different indicators and two different restrictions. First and foremost, I have a spear phishing campaign that is opening up this trickbot.m. This is associated with known malware, so as expected, we block this based on reputation. But where we need to start analyzing behaviors is when we see a trusted application being leveraged in a nefarious way. Here we see PowerShell's invoking a second instance of PowerShell. That instance has an encoded command line. Opening this up, what we have for our customers is our powerful reveal functionality. Rather than taking the time to go in and decrypt and decode and understand the adversary's intent, Carbon Black does that analysis for you. So that now through reveal you can actually see the decoded command line here, where we can see that they were leveraging Mimikatz to dump credentials. So based on the behavior of this particular file or of this payload here, we want to track and kill that process, saying, hey, we don't want to allow you to scrape credentials within the environment that's atypical or anomalous. Now, how these layers of prevention come into play is through what we call our policies. Now, policies are broken out into three key areas delivered by default. We have monitored, standard, and advanced. Now, standard is delivered based on our best practices, designed to be easy to implement and get up and running. Advanced is more of a hardening posture that will bring you beyond just blocking the known bad and malicious activity. Focusing in on standard here, what we will be able to assess is what type of rules or what type of prevention capabilities are at play. Now, this is important because we talked about cloud reputation, we talked about scripting prevention, behavioral prevention as well, but one of the components that I did not reference is what is our additional ransomware prevention layer. Now, we also have ransomware or canary files that are stored locally on your system. If anyone attempts to delete, modify, or encrypt those files, we can track and kill that process. This also protects access to the master boot record and volume shadow copies. So continual layers to this prevention. Taking this to more of an advanced standpoint, I don't want you in here having to configure what is bad and blocking that. Rather, we want to flip the script and say, okay, based on standard and advanced, we're deploying our best practices. But what happens if I want to start increasing my security posture, looking beyond just known bad and starting to reduce my attack surface? I mentioned it once and I'll mention it 100 times again. We all know that PowerShell is capable of doing nefarious activity, but is also beneficial from an administrative standpoint. What we want to be able to do here is start assessing how can I start restricting how PowerShell behaves within my environment. When PowerShell communicates over the network, it doesn't necessarily indicate nefarious activity, but we know that adversaries could use this. Or it could be a simple way of exposing your organization. So let's start seeing if this is something that we need to use within our environment. By simply clicking on test rule, what this will do is this will assess across 30 days minimum of data retention. There is variable data retention available here. What type of, where this would actually trigger a violation. So we can see across our organization, we have 6 different devices with a high number of events. For this particular assets in this policy, we only have 4 devices. Based on the fact that we're deployed across thousands of systems in this organization, this is relatively low. Perhaps what we want to do before implementing this is we could implement this and scope out those 6 devices. Or we could investigate further and say, okay, what is going on those particular devices? Is this nefarious activity? Do we want to allow it? Or not even nefarious activity. Is this bad hygiene? Do we want to allow this to happen? So by clicking in on the different search criteria here, what we will be brought to is our investigate page. Now, EDR is so critical in propelling us forward in understanding what adversaries are doing, what our users are doing, and being able to take the appropriate actions based on that activity. Now, we expose our visibility in multiple different ways. We can look first at enriched events. I like enriched events because if I am a tier 1 or day 1 analyst and I have not learned any sort of querying syntax or how to read information here, this is formatted in an event view, so it is a sentence format. The analyst would be able to go in and say, okay, I see that PowerShell is establishing a 443 connection to GitHub here. They can click to the right-hand side for more details on what that command line actually is, what GitHub string they're reaching out to here. But all of the additional activity is referenced, and it's something that's very simplistic to navigate or read. But in this case, I want to know maybe who those 6 devices actually are. Rather than looking at the events, perhaps I want to sort to the device tab. Start assessing those 6 devices and understanding if they are a part of a similar group, perhaps. If they're all administrators on my team, is this something that they need to do? What is grouping these devices together? Or perhaps we want to look closer at the network connections. Is there any sort of consistency or pattern that occurs with those netcons? Whether it be the remote port, the remote IP, or the different protocol that's being leveraged. We could also assess for interesting or anomalous locations being connected to here as well. But for the more advanced analysts, we want to make sure that you can go beyond just looking at these evented activities. Completely unfiltering this activity and viewing our process tab here will be brought to full threat hunting and IR activity, where you can see the process that's executing, the device that's associated with, and all of the different activity counts. Perhaps from an incident response perspective, I want to drill into this alert a little bit further. Now, process trees are available on any of these running activities, so we could dig into any of these for more context. But rather than the completely expanded process tree we were exposed to at first, what we now have is a completely dynamic process tree where I can expand fully to the right and the left-hand side to expose the full adversarial activities. We can continue to navigate and expand here. Down below, we will be exposed to the unfiltered information, giving us complete data confidence so that we could do things like file integrity monitoring. Looking in at file as script loads and the associated activity, we can start to analyze these scripts here as well. Now, noticing that this is an encoded command line, Reveal is also available on this page to decrypt and decode on the fly to, again, identify what exactly is being pulled in this scenario. Once we start to get a grasp around what is going on in this threat instance, we want to be able to take response and remediation actions. going into response and remediation, we can go live on this system. Now, live response is something that is a remote shell where you can do a whole host of functions. We can get files off of the remote endpoint for further analysis, kill off active and open processes, perform a memory dump, or leverage the more powerful execfg functionality to extend beyond some of the simple capabilities that are available in this command prompt. If we run execfg ipconfig, we will be able to pull back ipconfig information without having the ipconfig command. Think about the capabilities here, because this is completely exposed via our two-way API. So this could be leveraged in our orchestration actions. This could also be something that you extend and say, hey, execfg PowerShell.exe, implement a PowerShell command so that remotely on that system we can execute a PowerShell remediation script. So it's a very powerful capability that is completely audited. We can control which devices and users can leverage this functionality. Now this concludes our console walkthrough of VMware Carbon Black Cloud. With that, thank you all for listening to this overview, and be sure to reach out to your Carbon Black representative for more of a tailored demonstration based on your needs and your use cases.